Now it happened, as he went into the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath, here it is again, another Sabbath day, that they watched him closely. That's a lot of pressure. Wherever Jesus would go, people were watching him. Now, I'm not Jesus. I don't even compare myself to him, except in this case, I know what it's like to be watched closely. My mother-in-law, who's visiting us for a month, why are you laughing about that? She actually is. She's visiting us from Michigan for a month. She spends a month with us every year. Well, she travels around when we go to restaurants and stuff, and years ago, one of the first times she came here, she looked at me and said, "You couldn't get away with anything in this town. Everybody sees you, knows you, watches you. When you walk in, people are looking at you to see how you're going to say hi to that person, if you're going to smile or not. And you have to go, all that kind of scrutiny." So wherever Jesus went, they watched him closely. And you may not know this or not, but people are watching you closely. Even if it's just the family that is close to you or the people you work with. If you name the name of Christ, you're on their radar screen. They're examining your life. Daniel the prophet knew what that was about in chapter 6, when the law was passed that nobody could pray to any other god except the king. And he got on his knees publicly and 3 times a day faced Jerusalem and worshiped. And they came to the king, his enemies, and said, "That Daniel," that was their word, "that Daniel." It's like my mom used to say to my dad, "That son of yours, that Daniel, one of the captives of Judah, he's been praying to somebody else." They've been watching him closely. They watch Jesus closely. They're watching us carefully, closely. And they watched him on the Sabbath day. And behold, there was a certain man before him who had dropsy. What is dropsy? And somebody think, that's when your arm drops down. No, dropsy is an old word for edema. Edema is the modern medical term for swelling of an extremity because of inflammation due to fluid in that area. So when fluid builds up, doctors call it edema. And that's the dropsy. We don't know what caused it, but this man had dropsy. Because it was in a Pharisee's house on the Sabbath, I can't help but wonder, I can't prove it, but I can't help but wonder if he wasn't planted there on purpose. Because they knew something about Jesus. They knew he was a man of compassion. They knew that he couldn't stand still in the face of human suffering. He had to do something. Here's a guy with a dropsy, and it's the Sabbath day. Let's bring him to dinner. Now, if that is the case, this is especially cruel, to exploit somebody's condition like that and to use him as bait. But I believe that is what is happening. They're using him to bait him. So Jesus answering, what is he answering? Well, he's answering their thoughts. Spoke to the lawyers and the Pharisees, saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" But they kept silent. And he took and healed him. That's his answer, like, "Yep." And let him go. And he answered them, saying, "Which of you, having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day?" And they could not answer him regarding these things. If an animal, again, got stuck, not only could they lead it to water, but if an animal got stuck in a pit, to pull it out would be considered labor. It's work. But it's an animal who's helpless. And so they were allowed to do that according to the oral interpretation of the Mosaic Law. It is similar to saying, if you had a flat tire on the Sabbath, is it lawful to fix it? If you were to go to Jerusalem, let's say I could take you there tomorrow. We were all on a bus. And tomorrow is Thursday, and we're touring the city and having a good time. But the next day on Friday evening, I decide to take you in our bus through a neighborhood called Mea Shearim. It's the ultra-Orthodox portion of the city of Jerusalem. If you drive a car or a bus through their city, their portion of town, they will stone you. They will stone the bus. Because the law says you shall not kindle a fire on the Sabbath. And when you put the key in the ignition and turn it to the right, and the gas from your carburetor, I'm thinking old school now, your, what is it? Fuel injection. And the pistons start firing, you've kindled, like, if you have a V8, 8 of them. You've kindled 8 fires on the Sabbath. You're down, dude. So that's how legalistic they are. Yet, for an animal, it's okay. So it's like, dude, your donkey had a flat tire, and you'll fix it on the Sabbath day. This guy had a flat tire in his life. I am fixing him. He's had dropsy. He's had disease. You guys will fix your flat donkey's tire. And here I am fixing a human life. And you're all bent out of shape because it's the Sabbath. By the way, they're still with us today. Every church has these nincompoops, loving, sweet nincompoops. And they should be answered. And they could not answer him regarding these things. So he told a parable to those who were invited. By the way, you could take all of this chapter and call it Jesus Table Talk. That's what it's about. There are 6 parables, 5 of which are particular to only the Gospel of Luke. And it's all stories, parables that are centered around the people that are gathered in this meal. The host, the person who has a disease, the people jockeying for position at the table for the best seats, and the rest of the crowd in the courtyard. So he told a parable to those who were invited when he noted how they chose the best places, saying to them, it was pretty customary to come to a meal if you were a kind of a local celebrity and expect to be seated like in a place of honor. And that's okay, except when it's embarrassing when the host comes and says, I've reserved your place for somebody really important. Would you go sit outside? Or go down to the other side of the table? That would be embarrassing. And that is essentially what Jesus tells them. When you are invited, when you are invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the best place, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him. And he who invited you and him come and say to you, give place to this man, and then you begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go sit down in the lowest place, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, go up higher, and you will have glory in the presence of those who sit at table with you. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. The way up is the way down. The way down is the way up. Get down, go low, humble yourself. Always the best attitude with anyone. Do you know who I am? There are 2 different kinds of people. One will enter the room and say, kind of like, do you know who I am? Or look who I am. I'm here. The other person will enter the room and go, there you are. That's the idea of humility. There you are. There you are. Let me honor and esteem you. It's not about me. Now, what's interesting about being a celebrity is it doesn't last long. Yesterday's famous people are today's forgotten people. Go get an old magazine. Have you ever done this? Gone to like a secondhand store and found old magazines? I've done it. And recently I flipped through and looked at all these pictures of these people and I went, who? Who? Who's that? Who? You know, so many have never even heard of them, but back then they were like, wow. And then he also said to those, or to him who invited him, when you give a dinner or a supper, do not ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, or your rich neighbors, lest they invite you back and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. For you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. So far, it's a pretty tense meal. Wouldn't you say? It's like, could you pass the olives? And notice the tension in the room.